Hey students, this is Miss Went, and I want to just kind of give you a start to this assignment called Comparative Anatomy. And you should have this either able to put in Notability or a paper copy of this. And what I'm going to do is kind of summarize some things from the reading and then just walk you through the questions, and then that'll be it. You'll be able to finish the questions on your own and hand this in. So the first page here is titled Comparative Anatomy. Anatomy here, this is a word where you're studying body parts. So we have a class called Human Anatomy where you learn about the names of all the bones and the muscles and all of that stuff. It's a great class to learn about your body parts, and if you are into exercising or weightlifting, that helps you learn the bones and muscles for that. And if you have any medical issues in the future, you'll be able to better understand what's going on with your body. Okay, the word comparative here means we're going to compare the anatomy of some different organisms. All right, so that's what comparative anatomy is. It's one piece of evidence that we use for evolution. Okay, now there's three types of things when we're comparing, we're going to be looking for. Okay, so there's something called homologous structures, and remember this word here, homologous, means the same. So we're going to look for structures that are the same among organisms. There's something called analogous structures, and then there's something called vestigial structures, and we'll get to those in a minute. The first one is homologous structures. Okay. So homologous structures are structures within different species that look the same but have different functions. All right, so look the same, have different functions. Okay, so homologous structures arise from structures in a common ancestor and are adapted to perform different functions or jobs. Okay. In other words, different species possess these structures because they descended from a common ancestor, but today they look different because they're adapted for different purposes. So they came from the same materials, but today they're used for different jobs. So an example would be if we're comparing an animal that lives on land and an animal that lives in the water, they move differently. One walks and one swims. So they're going to have different shaped body parts for that job. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. It says the forelimbs, so that means like on humans, this would be your arms. If we're talking about a dog or cat, it would be the front legs. Okay, so the forelimbs of vertebrates, animals with backbones, provide an excellent example of homologous structures. Humans, cats, birds, and whales all have forelimbs. Within this limb are three limb bones. So we have a humerus, an ulna, and a radius. So in humans, that's your upper arm. And sometimes the humerus is called the funny bone if you bump your elbow really hard. And then your lower arm has the ulna and the radius, the two little bones. And then you have a bunch of bones that make up your wrist, and phalanges are your fingers. Okay. However, the shape and size of these bones vary. They vary because the limbs are adapted for different functions. In humans, the forelimb is used for grasping or holding objects. So you guys use your thumb and your fingers to hold things. But in a cat, the forelimb is used for walking or running. So it's the same body part, but very different jobs. Birds are going to use it for flying. Whales will use it for swimming. So it's the same body part, but they have very different jobs, right? So that's what we said. They're adapted for a different purpose up here. All right, homologous structures imply evolutionary relationships. In other words, organisms with homologous structures are closely related to each other. And that's because these structures are explained by descended from a common ancestor. So I have a couple pictures here to show you. The first one over here, we have the human. So this green bone here, this is your humerus, your funny bone, your upper arm. Then your lower arm has two bones here, the radius and the ulna. The ulna is the longer one that kind of covers up your elbow. And then you have some wrist bones here and some finger bones that are all kind of little and chunky so you can move in lots of different directions. Now, if you look at a frog is an amphibian, spends most of his time in water. He's got the exact same bones in the exact same places. The sizes are a little different, right? Our ulna and radius here are longer, but you can tell they're obviously the same bones in the same order, in the same places. And then here's another picture here that's comparing a human, a dog, a bird, a bat, and a whale. So humans use their arms to grab things, dogs are walking on their legs, birds are flying, bats are flying, and whales are swimming. And some of the bones are very different kind of shaped or lengths. Some are very shorter or longer in others. But if you look at kind of the color key, it's all the same bones. They all have the same colors in the same order. It's just depending on how they're using the bones, some of their bones are longer or shorter. Okay? But because they all have the exact same bones, this shows that they have a common ancestor and that they are related to each other. Okay, so once again, this was called homologous structures. So homo means same, so the same kind of structures, same kind of bones. Okay, so that was the kind of the first piece of anatomy we wanted to look at. The second one here, we have the word analogous structures. Now, these are things that have the same job, but they do not come from a common ancestor. Okay, so they evolve separately in different species, but they evolve for the same reason. So if you think about all the animals that fly, we have birds and bats, which are mammals. We have insects. We have butterflies. Ancient dinosaurs. They all had wings to fly, but those wings are all very different from each other. Some have bones, some don't. Some have feathers, some have scales. They're all very different. Okay, so if you have an analogous structure like wings, that doesn't mean that you have a close relationship. Analogous structures do not show close relationships because they don't have the same structures, like the same bones inside. Okay, so that's kind of like the bottom of the first page, and then this continues on the second page if you have a paper copy. Okay, it says different species develop analogous structures because of common selective pressures from the environment. In other words, the environment selects for certain features and functionalities. So if you have to fly to get food, all the animals need that function. They got to be able to fly. But because they start with different body parts and they have different mutations, those body parts are all going to change independently from each other. Okay, so different organisms have different underlying anatomies because they are unrelated. However, those structures become adapted to perform the same function. Okay, and then it goes on to talk about the wings of animals. So I got a picture here to kind of compare a bat and a butterfly. They're both wings, but they have very different shapes. The bat has bones that are in the wing, and those bones are holding patches of skin. And all these patches of skin are used to catch air, kind of like a hang glider. Okay? Whereas the butterfly is going to have thousands of little tiny scales that make up the wings, and they overlap, give them a lot of color. Very thin, there's no bones in there. And the butterfly has 4 wings that can move independently. The bat has 2. So they have very different structures. And just because these two guys can fly, they do not have a closely related common ancestor. Okay, so they're pretty far apart on the family tree. So that was our second one, our second piece of anatomy we're looking at, called analogous structures. Things that have the same function or the same job, but very different body parts, so they do not have a close relationship. All right, now the third thing we're going to look at that evolutionists and biologists look at with anatomy is something here called a vestigial structure. Lots of times in humans we call them vestigial organs, and your appendix is the main one that gets talked about a lot. And the word vestigial means left over. Okay, so these are body parts of yours, body structures that are left over from the past. And as you've evolved, or not you, but as humans have evolved and changed over the last, million years, 2 million years, 5 million years, we have some body parts that we just didn't need anymore. But the code is still in our DNA, and our body still builds them, even though technically we don't really need them for anything. Okay? And lots of animals have these structures. Okay? Now, these vestigial structures do imply evolutionary relationships. What it does show, it shows where we did divergence, which means splitting apart. Okay, so we have a body part that we don't need. We must have split apart from a different creature that did need that body part. Okay, so some examples of vestigial structures here. In humans, the appendix is the main one. The appendix is a little pouch or a little closed tube that's where your small intestine meets your large intestine. So, and this is where your food goes, and the large intestine is the leftover waste before you poop. So maybe that helped digest food before, but we don't need it anymore. Maybe because we eat different kinds of foods now, or we cook our food with fire. We're not eating a lot of raw meat anymore. So we don't really need the appendix anymore, and it actually gets infected kind of easily. There's a lot of bacteria in your intestines, and if the bacteria kind of gets stuck and builds up here, it can be infected. And people may have surgery to remove their appendix. Because if that bacteria, if your appendix kind of gets swollen up and kind of breaks open like a balloon, that bacteria will get into other body parts and could kill you. So it's really important if this is infected that it gets taken care of. Okay? But it seems like the appendix doesn't really do any function right now at all. You also have a tailbone. We don't have a tail to wag, but we do have a little bit of a tailbone left over. And if we fall down hard on our bottom, we can break our tailbone, and it's very painful. There's a lot of nerve endings in there, but it doesn't really do anything for us, right? Lots of other mammals have tails. We're one of the few mammals that doesn't. We don't need it. It would probably get in the way of us walking upright and sitting down. But we still have a little bit of that tailbone left. Okay. One of what I think is kind of the coolest vestigial structure, snakes and whales are descended from animals that used to walk. But the whale here, and this is true for whales and dolphins, they still have little bones in their body where their back legs used to be. But they're such good swimmers and they use their tail for swimming that those back legs would just get in the way. So they don't have back legs anymore, but their body still makes the little bones where the legs should be because it's coded in their DNA, and that's just what their body does when they build. Okay, so that's a real cool one. And then on the human here's some examples of some vestigial structures. Your tonsils probably play a role in your immune system, kind of fighting off bacteria and viruses coming into your body, but scientists aren't fully sure about that. There's still lots of things we have to learn in your body. Some people can wiggle their ears. A lot of animals will wiggle their ears to be able to hear better in different directions, or to like flick flies away. That's not really a skill humans need anymore. Wisdom teeth, they get in the way of our mouth a lot. We get them removed. So they're extra in there, and they actually cause problems for a lot of people. There's your appendix kind of right here in your digestive system. because we wear clothing now and live in shelters, we don't really need a full coat of body hair. And then your coccyx is the name of your tailbone. So if you're wondering what the heck this thing is pointing to, that is your tailbone. Okay. So what we've done with this reading here is we've introduced you to 3 types of structures that we look at for comparative anatomy. So remember, we had the homologous structures, and they were body parts that have kind of the same function. Or I'm sorry, not the same function, but they have the same structure, the same bones, kind of in the same order to show that they're related. Then we have analogous structures, which are body parts that do the same job, but they're really not related. They have much different parts they're built out of. And then, these vestigial structures, which are just leftover body parts that our ancestors needed, but we don't need anymore. Okay. Now your assignment is you have 3 pages, kind of one for each of these, where you're going to do a little bit of coloring to identify these structures that are the same or different, and 1 or 2 questions here. So here's some bones here, very similar to a picture I showed you. And you're going to color the human bone using the directions here, and then color the matching bones on the other ones to kind of show that you can see how they match up. And then you just have to describe which one of these terms matches this picture and why. Second picture here, you've got a butterfly, a bird, and a bat. You have a little bit of coloring here. You're going to look at all the wings of these guys. And then for the wings, which word describes the wings? And then in your last picture, you have some human body parts that you're going to color, and which word matches up with those parts. So I think it's a pretty easy coloring and question assignment if you paid attention to the reading. When you are finished, please hand this in, and you can get on with any makeup or catch-up work you might have. All right? Have a great day, guys. Good luck.